Well, if this is all they did to the fighter and the barbarian, I can't wait to see what they do to the monk. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if they added weapon mastery, gave them a way to stunning strike themselves, and then decide the monk was good. In all seriousness though, if weapon mastery was the only major change they made in this playtest and everything else was just a few small tweaks, I think we all would have thought this was a step in the right direction. Weapon mastery does increase martial damage. Some of them definitely don't do enough, but it is a good start. It gives the martials tactical options that aren't just damage, like pushing enemies away or knocking them prone. These are all things we wanted on martials, but that brings me to one of the first issues I see with this, is that it's so easily accessible. You can get this from a 4th level feat they added or just a 1 level dip into fighter. This will likely make it so characters like blade singers, swords bards, paladins, and rangers will be just as good, if not better, than most fighters or barbarians at certain weapon masteries with such a little investment. So the biggest buff to martials in this playtest makes it so casters can do the same thing but also have spells. And this wouldn't necessarily be a problem if weapon mastery just scaled a little bit better. The features that the new fighter gets at 7th and 13th level just can't even compete with a lot of the spells the casters are getting at those levels. Another issue is that that's the only change to martials, and wizards and sorcerers got buffed even more than the martials did. As a side note, I've seen a lot of mixed opinions about the warlock. I'm not really sure how I feel about it, but it's not super important to this video. So anyway, so the martials got weapon mastery. What did the wizard get? The ability to swap out any of their prepared spells with a single 11-minute ritual cast. The ability to modify their spells so their concentration can't be broken by damage, so that their spells only affect enemies, or so that the range is longer than any battle map you'll ever play on. And on top of that, if they get enough money, they can make those modifications permanent as well. And I've heard a lot of people saying that the really high cost is what keeps this balanced, but it definitely doesn't. Since Modify Spell is a ritual spell, the wizard doesn't really need any money to get a ton of use out of this spell. Let's take a 9th level wizard for example. He's expecting to do a day of travel with a bunch of random encounters and then likely a boss towards the end. So he starts his day off modifying his mid-level concentration spells like Web and Hypnotic Pattern so that his concentration can't be broken by damage. And then whenever he runs out of spell slots for one, he can just modify the other and start using that one. And he could repeat it again for his best 4th level spell. Then when he thinks the boss fight's coming up, he can take 11 minutes and modify his Animate Objects or Wall of Force, whichever one he thinks is going to be better for the fight, and then the concentration can't be broken on that either. Or if he's expecting to fight a fellow mage, he could modify his counterspell so it has no components and thus can't be counterspelled back. So just having Modify Spell made it so his concentration couldn't be broken by damage for pretty much the entire day, and that's just one of the many possibilities for Modify Spell. So the wizard could probably use some toning down, but what about the sorcerer? Other than their new capstone, Arcane Apotheosis, which is completely broken, I made a short about it up there if you'd like to check it out. Every other new feature the sorcerer got isn't very good, unfortunately, though they did get more spells and access to the same spell list as wizards, which is huge. Those two things alone are huge, and some of their meta magics actually got better as well. But none of them are quite as good as Modify Spell is. So after all that, what changed? I really don't think anything changed in terms of balance between the martial and spellcaster classes. We still pretty much have all the same problems there. And another problem that still exists just within the martial classes is that range is still way better than melee, though I do think that gap closed a little bit thanks to weapon mastery. Specifically, Graze and Topple were really nice boosts to melee, but with those weapon masteries and the feats from the old expert classes that we're still supposed to be using, we still have the problem that polearms and crossbows are the best weapons in the game by a landslide. They removed the power attacks from Great Weapon Master and Sharpshooter, but ended up giving polearms and crossbows the best masteries for the most part, and on top of that, polearm master and crossbow expert still function pretty much the same as well. With the addition of the Vex and Nick properties, I think some dual wielding characters can start to compete as well, but we still have pretty much the same problems that the martial characters had before. So how could they go about fixing this? Here's some potential ways I've seen elsewhere online or personally thought of. In terms of the martial spellcaster divide, they could definitely start by toning down some of those unique wizard spells, and they could probably nerf some of the more overpowered spells, though I'm much more in favor of buffing martials over nerfing spellcasters. I do think they should keep weapon mastery, but they still need to give martials more features and more features that scale better. They still just don't have anything close to spells, though that could include scaling weapon mastery itself. Maybe at a certain level of fighter or barbarian, the potency of all the weapon masteries goes up for just those classes. And those features that the martials get need to start doing things that only spells can right now. Things like AoE damage or potentially even AoE control. I know a lot of people think those things are a bit too video game-like or unrealistic, but mechanically they just need more to be able to compete with spellcasters. One good thing Weapon Mastery did is it sort of raised the floor of damage. The minimum damage a martial character can be doing is significantly higher than it was before, but the damage ceiling, or the maximum amount of damage a martial character can be doing, really didn't go up that much, if at all. And if the main thing the martial characters are going to be doing is damage, they should probably be the best at it. And then in terms of problems between the martials themselves, they definitely need to make the weapon masteries a bit more balanced between each other. There's some that stand out a lot right now, and there's some that do almost nothing. I definitely think we should favor buffing the weaker ones instead of nerfing the better ones. And then, so other styles of fighting compete with polearms and crossbows, they could make new feats for the styles of fighting that don't have one yet, like throwing weapons, and they could buff the weaker feats like dual wielder. And lastly, they just need to find more ways to make going into melee worth it. Crossbow expert with a push heavy crossbow and a vex hand crossbow is way better than anything a melee character can do right now. They could maybe buff tanking and control abilities that the melee characters do have, like sentinel or stunning strike, or maybe even make a few new features that only melee characters have access to. Let us know if there's any solutions you've heard or thought of in the comments below, and if you agree or disagree with me. But that's all I have for this one. I encourage all of you to fill out your surveys. Thank you all for watching. I hope you have an awesome day, and I'll see you in the next one.